It's a big question around what's the role for civil society. I was actually just at a meeting a couple of weeks ago convened by Civicus, which is the World Alliance of civil society groups focused on exactly these issues. And many civil society leaders from around the world were quite worried because they see that even in the most advanced economies that there is seen to be a clawing back of room for critique, public debate, governments using maybe very subtle or indirect things, say, through the tax code that might affect the ability of civil society to speak out. And so this isn't just a developing country issue, this is a global debate. Asia, I think this is a very big and open topic with a lot of diversity, ranging from India, where it differs dramatically across the country, to the Philippines, Indonesia, where you have very different views, to, say, China, of course, which has its own history and debates on these issues. So I was just in Myanmar, where there's a blossoming of civil society, but from a very low starting point. And the amount of free discourse that's grown in the past few years is very inspiring, at the same time as there's a long ways to go. So I think, like so much of the world, there's no single answer. There's multiple answers, but if there is a single answer, it's that we need to keep pushing for this. And we need to make sure that all governments are held to account, not as a question of their legitimacy, but as a substantiation of their legitimacy, that these public policy actors can withstand scrutiny as a test of their efficacy and their strength. Well, I've only spent a week in Myanmar, and I'm not an expert, so I would certainly want to caveat any answer with that. But having been around the country a little bit and been in conversations with many people who are either interested or getting involved, there certainly seems to be what I would call a gold rush mentality around the world of people and investors in particular wanting to go in, seeing such fertile economic territory. We see consumer goods industries going in. Coca-Cola just announced, of course, a major investment. At the same time, you have locally very important challenges, not just politically. You have infrastructure challenges, which are tremendous. The first ATMs even were just brought in recently, I think a few this year, into the city. The financial services sector just coming in. We're seeing the notion of an independent central bank just being discussed for the first time. I was just visiting some schools outside of Yangon, and informal schools last week. And you saw how these incredibly low levels of education have presented a huge challenge structurally for the country to invest in. So I think not just managing this wave of interest from the global investor base, and not just building the infrastructure locally and tackling the politics, but really a significant investment in the education and skills of the workforce is going to be a major, major priority for at least a generation or more to start catching up with the advances in other parts of the region. You see that throughout Asia there are some similar patterns. You have, especially in the larger economies, major investments in agriculture that help set the foundation for subsequent economic growth. You had a variety of industrial policies after the rural sectors were higher productivity, different forms, whether it's the chaebol of Korea or the more family-oriented businesses, say in Taiwan, conglomerates in Japan. Very different industrial structures that made a big difference. But I think Myanmar has really a challenge of, again, managing this global capital influx and setting up even the contracts in a smart way so that there is not just an expropriation in the end of global capital back to global markets, but really smart ways of revenue sharing, of making sure and even putting in conditions around investments in the local workforce, really thinking through what's the sustainability strategy around the environment. I would also urge caution not to move too fast and to think these things through, and especially in the natural resources sectors where we've seen many countries struggle with foreign firms coming in, taking out resources, and then wondering a handful of years later, wow, what happened to all the return on this investment? Why is none of it showing up locally?